it has never been equality. On the contrary, history has shown tremendous social inequalities. However, we had, since the post-war period, post-Second War period, some decades, the glorious decades, in which there seemed to be some approximation between those with high incomes and lower incomes. And was what we've seen statistically, the development of middle classes and some well-being. Although I'd rather see the concepts like social citizenship. So social citizenship rights, as well as obligations, were quite spread along the society. Now, what we have seen in the last few years, already decades, is a fracture of this system. And that has created tremendous problems. So, if the problems of social inequality are associated with precarity of jobs, with disenfranchisement of sectors of the population that cannot afford anymore to have some of the basic services or even education, or even all those income opportunities that would allow them to live with dignity, then I think the problem is to counteract that. And that's where the social innovation can come in. Because one of the questions we've seen is that because institutions and the market had not been very able to answer those casualties of the restructuration of the economy, the loosening of jobs, etc., we've seen that more and more citizens themselves, NGOs, civil society organizations, had started to organize themselves and say, okay, we do something. We do something because we cannot wait just to have or expect that something is going to come from us, from institutions. So part of the argument is that perhaps if we would listen to all those organizations that are all creating possibilities through their own organization and through their own initiatives and to finding alternative resources, if they are active in already organizing this, let's say, social capacity and capability to actually create opportunities, what institutions could do is to listen and to look at these people and to see how they can support them to make these very creative initiatives more sustainable, more, let's say, capable of actually solving questions. After the Indignados movement and the change in the later governments, local governments, there's been perhaps some more openness to actually look at some of these projects. So I think we should understand this leadership that is coming from society, from civil society and social movements, and it should be a dialogue with that leadership. But I do think that to make that, as I say, consolidated, we need leadership in institutions, in local councils. I got the impression that the city councils are at the basic level of governance in which you can have a strong leadership, because most of these samples, these projects are urban based, are urbanly located. So to me, the most immediate institutional level, which is city councils or metropolitan governments, should be the basic, let's say, institutional leaders in actually register all this. Having said that, there is also the question of coordination and coordinating the leadership, different city councils, like in metropolitan governance institutions, that will reinforce it. And I think there are cases in Quebec, for example, we hear from our colleagues that that's what has happened. They have what we call a scale-up from the neighborhood, the city council, and then arriving to the region and having also some enlightened leaders, institutional leaders that actually pick up these ideas and these practices and then consolidate them. So obviously the higher the level of governance, the more capacity is going to be. But I don't think we should lose the local the city level, because the creativity comes basically from what is happening in cities. Cities have always been creative, and are constantly things happening there. Other area we see is in care. Care often, especially in a society that is aging, care is very important, especially for the elderly. And a lot of social care is done by women that are highly exploited, right? And also there is done by institutions that treat the people who are cared of like recipients who are dependent. Now in Madrid there is a very interesting organization of especially women specialized in care, and people that are with low means, but with a way of treating them in that they never feel like if they are in disadvantage, making care as a sort of equal relation, and provide the resources to those without incomes, again, in a way in which they become involved in activities, but there is never this sort of equidistant or sort of this unequal relation between the social worker and the dependent, but it's a sort of more equal relation. But having which is very important, also having a lot of care that the women who look after other people do have decent conditions, decent salaries, etc., etc. So you can have cooperatives developing in that kind of line, in which you dignify the work, but also dignify the recipient of the work. That you can do tremendous amount of work, and that can be institutionalized a lot, or help to be institutionalized, because it has a different mentality, it's a different way of working, and a different concept of, who is the other person. For us, social innovation is not only protecting them in the daily basis, but also our ideal is that these institutions or these unions or these groups actually can put pressure to change the law. So the first thing is, provide those services or that help. The second, campaign to change legislation, because it's only when you change legislation and you have programs that are more comprehensive that you really have a big impact in the population.